Make that scope go 360 degrees. I've left that on there so that you can actually see what the tip does. Ignore that. That's so that we can see that you're doing. I want you to rotate the scope. Is that 360 or is that 90?
That's 90. That's 90.
How will you rotate 360
Yes,
degrees?
360. I don't know.
But you've been scoping.
360 degree animation I have done. I have done it so far.
So if somebody is not able to understand anything, ask him again. Yes. There is sometimes a problem just because of the accent.
What can I use?
I didn't say you couldn't.
Yes.
I
So
said,
I think I can do.
yeah, that's 90. Yeah. That's 270. How's your wrist feeling?
Quickly, I will say, no, relax. My rest is much.
Okay. How does the tension feel back there?
Right? More.
That's more. Okay. You seen your body position? See how you stood? So if we bring this up to your shoulder, how does that?
It's more. But here it's
Okay, because there's less tension. Okay. Have a go. Still, you're not even 180 yet? No? 90, not even 90. No? Any idea? My name's Paul. Have a go?
He is done.
No. Okay. Still not there? Okay. This is what I noticed on yours. Have a go. That's not what 360. You tried to con me. You got to 100 and then rotated the other way. No worries. Let me show you. So, in the scope, what you've got, you nearly got it. You nearly got it. But what you're doing is that you're rotating your wrists. If you've got the scope here and it's neutral, okay? All of you are stood here. All of you tried this, and then you tried this, and then you had that. You can actually make it do 180, 360 by just holding it here and just rotating the scope. No loop there, nothing, and the scope's gone. This hand can stay here. What takes it off is when you put the hands close together. So when you were all finding it a little bit more challenging, you all leaned in. The big reason why I wanted you to do what you've just done was, one, to see how you stood when you held the scope, so you all leaned in. Two, is to actually see what you did when you took the scope. So how did you hold the scope? Just this part of the scope. How did you hold it? Everybody held it the same. What was that?
Having the right position.
You had it like this. What is the most important thing that you've done? And it was correct. What is the most important thing?
Your waist and your legs in position.
It's this. If this is on the outside of the hand, watch. Why?
Because the 360 degree angulation
Yeah, but if I hold it in this hand, why? I hold it in this hand, why? Because this has gone the outside, why? What?
Because of the freedom of the movement, because
Still free. Nope. Here. Here. It's off. The torque is off. Why? It's because of this. What happens is that when you're applying torque and you're moving this part of the arm, if you use this part of the arm, it transfers down here. Look at it. See it? If I do this, this stays straight. And the torque goes down the scope. Doesn't get lost down here. That's why it's important to keep this here. So a lot of people will say hold the scope, but they'll never tell you why, because they don't know. Next thing, well, if we put the scope in the patient, the reason why I've got the tape on the floor there is if one of you, that's brilliant, put your feet on it, watch the camera. Now, my friend, I'm going to ask you to do me a favour. Just watch your feet on that camera. So you need to move to your, but on line with the tape. Put your feet in line with the tape. Both of them. Right. Hold the scope. So now I'm going to ask you just to take out the loop. So you're in the scope in the patient. How would you take out this loop? Yeah? Yeah? And then what? Then what? Advise him? Don't step back, just do what you would normally do. Would you step back in your normal unit? Stand by the tape? So what would you do? So withdraw the scope? Yeah, go on then. Do what you would normally do. Yes? No? You come and stand on the tape? How would you normally take that out?
So I do two things. One, I have to
Yeah?
lock and delock, and then
Yeah.
I go back because to make a row. That's why
Okay.
I just go back. I step.
You step back. Okay, you open your stance. Have a go. How would you scope?
I'll be doing the talk either the clockwise or
Yeah. And we've still got this. So now, hold your feet on the tape.
Yeah.
Now, keep your hand down. Don't move your hand from this part of your body. Take the torque off and slowly walk back till the scope is straight. Keep going. Keep walking. Keep walking. Keep walking. Keep walking. Keep walking. Is that scope straight yet?
Yes.
Right. We've got the tape. Pop the tape by his feet, just for a second. See the distance. See how far you've had to step back. A lot of people, they'll do this. There is no way that distance that you've taken back will actually take out the amount of scope you require. So what you need to do is look at the tape and see, just taking out a loop, what it can be. We've got a scope, usual end loop. Can you see it? I put the scope in, it loops. I'm just holding the scope gently in the hand. I increase the torque, it makes it more difficult. I take the torque off, but I don't take the torque off completely. If I take it off and go torque on, it makes it fill the bowel. If I apply the torque slowly as a withdraw, keep it applying as a withdraw, keep on applying as a withdraw, keep on applying as a withdraw. When I get to a certain point, The scope tip always moves. See it? Come back another centimetre. Keep the torque on, advance the scope. You seen this? Let the scope torque off. I've not done anything different. Keep the torque on. Apply the torque. Once the tip moves back a centimetre, the scope goes forward. Can you see it? Even though I've done nothing. Let the torque off the scope. So just put your hand up like that. Allow that to sit there. So it's no trick. I just get it through just a second. So I've got the scope here. You'll feel it just as it comes down. As it comes down, the scope comes down. The tip moves. I apply the torque. And as it goes forward, but as soon as I let that go, so what is the trick to taking out a loop? One, withdraw. Suction, no.
Release the pump.
Not releasing the torque. So if you noticed, as soon as I released the torque, the scope, when I come back, got to the point and then advanced, as soon as I let go of the torque, the loop starts. So what you do is you slowly apply the torque as you slowly withdraw. You don't go torque on, withdraw, because this is what happens. You've got the loop, torque on, see the space? Slowly apply the torque, you're not taking up and not stretching the mesentery. Right. So how long has it taken us from picking up the scope to not even putting the scope into the patient yet? A lot. So what we've got is a scope that will do what we want it to do. It's an extension of our arms. We can see what it wants to do. So if we want to understand when we draw the large wheel back, we just look at our hand. That's 187. That's 97. So the scope will do what we want it to do. We always want the lumen, the direction where we can, at 12 o'clock. The reason being, the maximum angulation possible. So how we can deflect the tip of the scope. If it's down here, then it becomes difficult. So if we do tip down and I apply clockwise torque, the scope will look to the left. If I do tip up and I do clockwise torque, the scope will look to the right. So we know what torque you've got on the scope, and we'll know what tip deflection you've got on the scope, just by saying 5 degrees of clockwise, 5 degrees of anti-clockwise. So in doing that, we'll know whether the tip's down or the tip is up. Yeah? So we've got a patient. Everybody happy with that so far? Any questions? No questions? Happy?
Just to recap, I think that the scope would give us the upfront position of 187
187,
and down would be the 97.
97. In a fully operational, fully serviced new scope.
And to de-loop the scope, so we have to slowly release the torque.
Slowly apply the torque.
Slowly apply the torque and at the same time pull out.
Withdraw.
Withdraw.
Yeah. Pull out
No pulling, no
gives you this. So,
Withdraw.
yeah, slowly withdraw. Do everything slowly. And the reason why we want you to do things slowly is that we can actually help you become better and more proficient. And should something start not to go to plan, we can help you more. As you get better and as you improve, what happens is that your speed gets better. So quality of colonoscopy, quality of any endoscopy is down to how you want to do it. If you want to just advance the scope, then this is the wrong course for you. If you want to actually push the scope in, then forget it. We're not going to teach you to push. We're going to teach you to advance. There are some times that you know you're going to cause a patient some discomfort. And those are the times that you have to actually say to the patient and prepare the patient. And you need to be aware of that. So in here, what we've got is a bit of a bowel. Is there anything that is of interest in the bowel? So we've got this area here. We can see how the colon sits. See how it's dilated? Can you see? So now, what we're going to do, we know the air works. Watch what happens when I put the air in. What part of the bowel is moving first? Sigmoid? What's this? What's this? Why? No. It's allowed to be more capacious. Why? Because of the patient position. So what's that got to do with it? Did you see how short a time I had my finger on the air for this to become... What's happened to the air?
This part of the bowel is more free. It is distended, tense, distended. Then it is not easy to.
Where does air go? If you're in the bath and you put a straw to the bottom of the bath and then you blow down the straw, where does it go? To the top. So what's happened here? So because we've got the patient in the left, what part of the bowel do we inflate first? So what happens? Why do we apply so much air when we're going at the beginning? But often we overinflate the bowel. We fill this part of the bowel up here. If we look at it. Look how tense it becomes. Now we can see down the left side, but feel that. If we put the patient on the back, this is less tense. If we put the patient on that side, can you see how now this is becoming more floppy? But this part of the bowel is now becoming distended. So understanding that enables you to have a conception about where the position that you could be in if you're finding it difficult.
Paul, can I interrupt? I just wanted to introduce Vakar. Dr. Vakar is here. 5 hands on to observing the car. Right. From Lahore, Hyderabad, Karachi, and Islamabad.
My apologies for arriving late. My flight was cancelled and my team lost.
Your team won.
My team lost.
Right. So, you recognise the position? You see it? Do you recognise it? The scope, shape. So the scope's going in. Yeah? To optimise what you do, patient's here. Scope is here. Now do you recognise the position? I want to apply clockwise torque. If I put my hand underneath, I can allow the torque to go in. If I want to do anti-clockwise torque, my hand comes over the top. I can do anti-clockwise torque. If I want to see what's happening, so we're on the screen. If you watch, I draw the scope back. Where's the lumen? How am I going to bring that to 12 o'clock? How much? 30, 40 degrees. Don't guess. So where's 90 degrees? So if we look at, where's 12 o'clock on the screen? Right, so touch where 12 o'clock is on the screen. So where's 9 o'clock? So what's the difference between 9 and 12 o'clock in degrees? 45? 90. So 9 o'clock, right? So where's the lumen? So what does that make it in degrees then? 100. So, how would you apply this torque? Where would you, how would you hold the scope? Yeah, but where would you hold the scope?
15 to 20 centimeters. 15 centimeters.
Okay, so I'm holding it here.
And try to keep in horizontal.
Right, so the start position, to me, you would hold the scope here. You would bring the scope round here. And then you'd have the lumen at the top, yes?
Try to keep the
Yeah. If you've got the same thing here, we know where the lumen is. If I start with my thumb at 3 o'clock, I bring my thumb whilst gripping the scope to 12 o'clock, I'm now comfortable. I now can do tip up. So what have I done? But what did I do? I started with my thumb in the position of where you would anticipate how much torque you would have to have applied. So I know that I've got to come round from here to here. So instead of finishing uncomfortable, I start at 3 o'clock and I bring it to 9 o'clock. Yeah? So that's slightly different to what you do. Advance the scope. Let the torque come in naturally. Draw back the scope, advance the scope. Draw back the scope, anti-clockwise, as you can see. Let the buttons rotate to the floor, tip up. See it? My stance is now pointing towards the monitor. What is the shape of my shoulders? What is the shape of my shoulders in relation to my hips? Am I doing this? What's the importance of that? Ergonomics. Now, I'll go on to that in a few moments. You can see where the lumen is. What torque do I need to apply to go into the lumen, to advance? Anti-clockwise? 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 What torque do I need to apply to go in the direction of the loop? And yeah, that's how much degrees, but what torque? Anti-clockwise or clockwise? Anti-clockwise? Okay, so you can see it there. I'm going to really upset you all. It's clockwise. Why is it clockwise? Because it straightens the scope. And the scope itself I've not advanced, but it's gone forward itself. And the reason being is that what happens is that we keep going in the same direction and we get this corkscrew motion. Often we have to actually take it back and allow the scope to straighten up. If you keep going in the same direction, you will loop.
The reason for doing clockwise here was previously you have done anti-clockwise?
The reason being is that I knew that the right thing to do was to go clockwise. What did I say 15, 20 minutes ago? When you advance or when you withdraw? When you're taking out a loop? Yeah, but when you're advancing, what did I say about resistance? So in applying the anti-clockwise, when I actually advanced, I felt a little bit more resistance. So I applied the clockwise torque, even though it was 270 degrees, and then the scope took itself forward. So that was the least resistance. So what you're doing is that you're following the path of least resistance. Least resistance means that you're making it a little bit more comfortable for the patient. So we've got the scope. We can see what it can do. Scope is there. We just draw it back and we allow it to advance. See it? Now, what would you do now? What? Tell me what to do next.
Bring the fluid to 6 o'clock.
Okay?
For section, that is section.
Advance. 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 Withdraw. Oh, so I've gone 10 centimetres. As you keep going, what happens is the bowel, even though you can keep going and you can see where the target is, and you can see where you're going, the bowel stretches before you. Even though you could still keep going, the bowel still stretches before you. If you withdraw, it takes tension out of the bowel, come back another, and then it will allow it to go forward. Same as in the mannequin. It will allow you to go forward. See? Draw back. Advance. Draw back. Advance. Yeah? Draw back. Now I'm drawing back further, and then go advance.
Even if it's not looking,
What it-
constantly turbo, we should.
You advance to a point. As it slows down in being able to go forward, you know that the scope is giving somewhere. So what you need to do then is just draw back and then advance. Okay. Right. You don't have to get all the way around on the mannequin. All we want to do is just see how you handle the scope. So what you've seen is we've explained what this does. We've explained what the responsibility of this. We've explained what this does. We've explained about the buttons. We've explained about this. Is there anything else that you want us to go through? Stiffness? Right. Here's the scope. Yeah, floppy. Here's the scope. I apply torque. I take torque off. Floppy. Apply torque. Stiffness does work, but stiffness, what part of the scope does the stiffener stiffen? Is it this bit? Is it this bit? Is it this bit? What part? All of it? So what part? You say no? No? So what part? Show me.
Step has to be, steps of foot just over there, in the middle of that.
So this is the middle of the scope.
Yeah.
You don't know?
My hands are up.
What part does the stiffness affect? So I apply stiffness, you don't know.
No, I think when you apply torque, it becomes stiff.
It does, but if you apply the stiffener,
Yeah.
what part does that stiffen the scope?
At
Is
the
it from
end,
here
the end.
to here?
The tip.
Yeah, the end.
Tip?
Tip
Tip.
doesn't, so the tip doesn't get stiff.
Okay. Which part does?
Rest I don't know, but the tip doesn't get stiff.
Stiffener. Middle part. This part. That's the middle part. What is the purpose of stiffness in the scope?
Let's look for it.
Where?
In the sigma.
Right. So where will the tip be?
So at a distance.
Where will the tip be?
Tip is, there's a hepatic flexor right?
Patic?
No, no,
In the descending.
we apply the stiffness and we are going to negotiate the reducing point.
Yeah.
No way.
Don't ask me, I'm asking you. I know the answer.
When we usually apply the stiffness.
So your guys apply the stiffness when you go into the retrosigmoid. Is that what you're telling me? So you're here and then you apply the stiffness. Is that correct?
Not always.
Not always, but that's...
Not always.
If I am at the
Yeah, the appa-
hepatic flexor in the mid transverse and after taking out the loop in the sigmoid and again loop is forming, then I will go with the stiffness.
So what part of the scope has got stiffness?
The proximal. I will
This
go the
part.
exact line.
This part. Because this part is the only part. So you applying this in the retrosigmoid stiffens outside the patient. So there's no point. You're applying stiffness, and this is putting you on the spot, but what I'm saying to you is, I went through the processor, I explained to you what that did, and for you to pick a scope up and not know exactly what your scope is doing, therefore makes you think about, should I be doing that, using that piece of equipment in that way? Unless you know what it does, and how it does it, then don't do it. Because if you don't understand what it's doing, because what can happen is that stiffness can actually perforate the scope, perforate the patient. You don't perforate a lot here, you perforate here.
And how frequently do we apply the stiffness guide?
Well, I don't use it a great deal. I don't use it. Old school don't use it. Yeah. I don't use it a great deal. I tend not to, but on the course, I do use it so that you guys have an understanding of when it can be used and when it should be used appropriately. But I tend not to use it. Okay. So before you start with the scope on a patient, first of all, we've got the light. When I pick a scope up, I will always pick the scope up this way. I'll take it from there and I'll get my hand, and what will I do? Did anybody see what I did when I picked the scope up first thing? No, I listened to it. I can see the light. Anything else? I did this. And you guys just thought I was just getting the scope ready to do what I wanted to do. Why am I doing that? I'm feeling for any imperfections down the scope as I draw it back. Even though I may have used this scope twice already in the morning, doesn't mean that it hasn't been trapped, hasn't been kinked. There's a few kinks in the scope. I can feel them. The other thing what I'm doing, I'm getting a feel for the scope. I'm getting a feel if the scope is straight. I'm getting some scopes you'll pick up and they'll be in a certain shape. So you have an understanding of what it's doing. So if a scope is like that, I'll do this just to feel what the scope does. So when you pick up a scope, it isn't just about picking the scope up. It's about examining the scope, feeling the scope. You don't see it being done old school. Hold the scope, put it into the patient, allow this arm to come down, put the scope in, let the scope sit in a straight line. If I let the scope sit in this position and I want to do something, I'm pushing this part of the scope into the bed. If I want to apply clockwise torque, I find it hard because I'm pushing that part into the bed. If I have this scope in this straight, it's easier to apply torque. If I have it in this position, I can apply anti-clockwise, not a problem. But if I've got my hand up here, all of a sudden, it's very heavy. If I've got my hand down here, it's very light. So I want to apply anti-clockwise, I do the same with this arm. So here. I want to apply clockwise, I'll bring this up, but I'll stop it going clockwise here, and then I'll allow it to go clockwise. Because it's easier to do. Okay? Is there anything you want me to go through? Anything you want me to cover? Anything you're unsure of?
One more thing for the top. Can you do it again, please?
If you hold the scope up here, which a lot of people do, and you stand too close, you become very resistant. What you need to look at the shoulder. See how this shoulder is higher than this shoulder? Stand up straight. Turn, face the monitor. Bring your hand round. Let the hand relax. Anti-clockwise. Advance the scope. Tip up. Clockwise. Tip down. Draw back the scope. Bring it round. So all of this is just picking your way through. Let it come round. Tip up. Tip down. See? So all of this is just making the scope do what you want it to do. You don't want to actually force anything. Yeah? See the liquid? What does the liquid tell me? So what does that tell me? Well, not necessarily, but what does it tell me? The liquid tells me that's the left lateral. That tells me that's the right. So wherever the liquid sits, it's whatever position the patient's in. So if they're in the left lateral, the liquid will sit there. If they're on the supine, the liquid will sit there. So the liquid is very important because it tells you where the patient is closest to the floor. Yeah? Right. Have a go.